Welcome back. Could football be facing its fourth quarter? Well, you say, what are you talking about, Rich? The ratings higher than ever, and you'd be right. But if you saw this past Sunday New York Times Magazine, the cover story, it certainly presents an interesting question, and that is football the next tobacco? We've seen countless former NFL players come forward saying that they are suffering from traumatic brain injuries, dementia, Lou Gehrig's disease, and other issues after taking years of hard hits on the field. Times profiled one of the first attorneys to come forward and in fact sue the league. He charged that the NFL was involved in a, quote, scheme of fraud and deceit by failing to warn players of the dangers they faced and by publishing research of its own that falsely minimized risks. Times article went on to say, as they took a look at smoking and how a once acceptable practice thought to have presented little to no medical consequences is now in the decline after big tobacco companies and the government finally came forward admitting to the fact that smoking can cause cancer and even death. Is football headed down the same road, and could insurance companies handle football-related injuries much differently down the line? And Doug, I know you've been involved in asbestos cases, and if you look at it, on a timeline from 40 years ago to now, are there parallels here where, definitive science, right, states that this is the reality, and you're not going to put a warning label on a helmet, but as a consequence to indemnify, to ensure? I'm not just talking about the pros, but Division I, Division II, Division III, Pop Warner high school football. Is that going to be the consequence of this, not just the lawsuit for the NFL?
Well, there are definite parallels where you have a defendant saying one thing, but actually their documents and their internal memos saying something different. The interesting thing here now is everybody kind of agrees that football, there's a 100% chance of a head injury if you play at Pop Warner, high school, college. So it's almost like now the word is out, and anybody that plays football is almost assuming the risk of the injury. It was a time if they were trying to tell you you're safe, concussions only if you're knocked out, that's a different lawsuit. Now you're going to have a point where somebody can say, listen, you knew it, it was in the papers, everybody knew it. But the big question is going to be with young kids. Can a young kid really sign a waiver and say, I know it, and I'll accept the fact that I could get injured? And then what's going to happen there is it's going to be uninsurable at some point, because an insurance company is going to say, listen, I don't care what the parent says, we know this is hurting people, and we know this kid is getting hurt. And I think there won't be a high school, and there won't be a college, and then there won't be a pro. You got to put aside how much everybody loves the sport, because everybody does. But when it becomes a health issue at some point, it becomes a health issue. I think,
Jimmy, there was a hope that, like I see with kids now, we never used to have to take a baseline test before the season. Now they do, and they see the brain activity so that at least they have a measuring point. But the problem is, one hit can cause permanent damage. One hit can have consequences far beyond even that measurement of it. So you can't do preventative to a certain point. They haven't gotten equipment or whatever that can really mitigate this. I just don't see how this is avoidable, and it's not like I'm rooting for football's demise, but anybody who thought the deal that the players took before kind of resolved this, they're kidding themselves, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I agree with Doug. As the information comes out more and more and more, it is the parents of the young children who are going to take heed, and that's where I believe it's going to start. I mean, is anybody going to let their children start getting hit like that at such a young age? And I think at some point, some people will. And I will tell you what does bother me is the more disadvantaged that are going to still see this as the only way out.
Absolutely right.
When you have less choices ahead of you, even as a parent, as tragic as that sounds, we have less choices for you, for your children. When your children perceive that they have less choices and they have this talent and this ability, they're more likely to take that.
So Mayo, now we come to it. Well, I think he hit the nub of it. Suburban markets around here, we're seeing Pop Warner participation way down. We're seeing instead maybe those kids playing other sports, the soccers, the lacrosses, whatever the case may be. But you go down south, southeast, you go to Texas, you go to other parts of this country, it's Friday Night Lights and it's a religion. If parents say, I don't care, my kid's playing, does that indemnify, or does the school still have the same problem if they're, again, struggling with real budgetary concerns? They're going to have to pay such a huge premium just to be able to put the kids on the field. How does the math work here?
Well, I think that First of all, when you're talking about adults, number one, it's a very different. You're talking about assumption of the risk today because everybody knows that there's this issue. When you're talking about kids, you know, as Jim and Doug said, look, the child is not capable of making that decision. And as Mark said, tons of parents all over Texas and Florida, they're looking forward to their child going to college for free and more than that, making an income as a professional athlete. They're going to continue to put the kids out there. What you'll probably find also is that they'll be asked to sign certain disclaimers. I don't think they're enforceable for that child, and normally the case would even be told until the child reaches the age of majority. But there are those who would still go ahead and do it. Look at boxing. I mean, in boxing, absolutely, you know that it is an inherently dangerous sport. It's one of the few sports that if it happened outside of the arena, it's an actual crime. It's an assault. Sometimes it's a homicide, depending on what happens in the ring.
I've always heard argued, though, that if it was litigated, if people chose to litigate what happened in a ring, even if everybody said you knew the risk before you entered into the agreement, people could win cases.
Boom Boom Mancini.
But
it's not necessarily always. Okay. And then you look hockey, soccer, all of these sports are inherently dangerous, and you're finding concussions in each and every one of them. I don't think anybody at the table is
rooting for football's failure, but I'm just telling you, read that cover story if you haven't seen it already. It will open your eyes as to where the future may lie for this. And don't think, by the way, it'll only stop at football. You know, everybody here's a parent. We all know kids playing sports and some of the other risks in other sports here. It's a whole new world, everyone. All right, when we come back here, I can't wait to get the take of these guys on it. We take a look at a law on the books that says the police can legally take your car, the cash in your pocket, even your TV, if they suspect, not convict, not even charge, if they suspect you of a crime. And it looks like a lot of officers around the country here aren't just embracing this system, they could be milking it. We're going to be right back with more on that after this.